The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA.
Hello, Nigel here. As an owl, I love to be awake all night, but allergy sufferers like you probably don't feel the same. So take Zysol at night to relieve allergies while you sleep. Then wake up fully refreshed for a more productive day. Zysol works fast and offers 24-hour continuous relief from sneezing, runny nose, itchy watery eyes, and itchy nose and throat, so you can enjoy doing the things you love all day long. Be Wisol. Take Zysol at night. Use as directed. Starts working in 45 minutes.
This podcast is part of E2C Network, where we share the whole Auburn experience.
Hello and welcome to War Horses, the only college equestrian podcast that really can't put this off any longer. I'm the host of this podcast, Auburn Elvis. Let's talk about some college equestrian. The 2025 NCEA National Championships has come and gone, so let's take one more look at this week's action with some meet recaps. All right, so we had the top 8 teams in the dual discipline going down to Ocala, Florida at the World Equestrian Center to settle who was the best team in the sport. Meanwhile, the single discipline teams were also doing the same thing. They wouldn't get started till Friday, so let's look at Thursday's action. So we have a whole bunch of quarterfinals to go through here. Number 1, SMU versus number 8, UT Martin. Now, I think in the previews I said this was going to be a 12-6 SMU win. Here's what happened. The matchups that day that came out that morning suggested SMU was going to do well in everything except maybe raining, but the Skyhawks couldn't even count on that event Thursday. SMU won fences, flat, and horsemanship 5-0, and then they won reining 3-2. That made the final score 18-2 in favor of SMU. Now, the big story here is that UT Martin got to take part in their first national championship tournament, but this meet was just dominated by the defending champs start to finish. SMU came out on fire, and they just rolled right on into day 2 with this impressive victory. Our next quarterfinal to look at, number 2 Auburn versus number 7 Georgia. Now, the stats suggested going into this that Auburn would win this one 11-9. The day of, the head-to-head matchups came out, and they also favored Auburn. There were 12 rides that favored Auburn. Georgia was favored in 7, and there was 1 toss-up ride. But about 2 points into fences, which was the first event of the day, I could tell Auburn was in trouble. Fences was a 2-2 tie, and that was Auburn's best event, so it was time to start panicking. Flat went 4-1 for Georgia. Horsemanship, Auburn's second best event, went 3-1 for Georgia, and reining was a 5-0 sweep for Georgia. That made the final score an eye-opening 13-4 win for Georgia. Now, this meet was just nothing but disappointment for Auburn. Here again, we saw the Tigers. They showed up at the national championship tournament, and they underperformed. This now makes the 4th time in 5 years that Auburn has lost in the opening round as either the number 1 or number 2 seed. So this is pretty rough. For Georgia, this was just amazing for them. They started hot, and they finished even hotter. They rolled right into day 2 like it was just a warm-up scrimmage for them. On we go to another quarterfinal. Oklahoma State, number 3 Oklahoma State at number 6 Texas A&M. The stats suggested Texas A&M was going to win this one 11-9. When the head-to-head matchups came out that morning, Oklahoma State was favored in 10 rides. Texas A&M was favored in 9, and there was 1 toss-up. Well, here's what happened. Fences went 4-1 for A&M. The flat went 3-2 for A&M. Horsemanship went 4-1 for Oklahoma State, and reining went 3-2 for Oklahoma State. That made the final score a 10-10 tie, and when they went and did all their slide rules and calculus, A&M ended up winning the tiebreaker. So, Oklahoma State's season comes to an end after a pretty good performance here, and Texas A&M basically just matched up really well for them. For the Aggies, they squeeze past the Cowgirls and they get into day 2, and their reward is they get to face a red-hot Georgia team. But we still got one more quarterfinal to talk about, number 4 TCU versus number 5 South Carolina. Now, the stats favored TCU to win this one about 10-8. When the pre-meet head-to-head matchups came out, the TCU was favored in about 13 of the rides. South Carolina was favored in about 6, and there was 1 toss-up. So here's what happened in the meet. South Carolina swept fences and flat 5-0 each. Horsemanship went 3-1 for TCU, and Reining went 3-2 for TCU, and that made the final score 13-6, South Carolina. So TCU did not ride very well at all. Giving away all 10 jumping seat points is going to get you beat pretty much every time. For South Carolina, their red-hot postseason run continues, and that sends them into day 2 of the tournament with a matchup against number 1 SMU. So we're going to stick with the dual discipline, and we're going to go right into Friday now. We had some upsets. Basically, everybody but SMU got upset, and so now let's talk about that. Number 1 SMU versus number 5 South Carolina. We didn't expect this meet to happen, so I didn't make a prediction, although the day of, when the head-to-head stats came out, or the head-to-head matchups came out, the stats favored SMU in about 12 rides, South Carolina in about 4, and then there were 4 toss-ups. Well, here's what happened. Fences went 4-1 for SMU, Flat went 3-2 for Carolina. Horsemanship went 4-1 for SMU, and Reining was a 5-0 sweep for the Mustangs. That made the final score 15-5 SMU. So the Gamecocks' terrific postseason run comes to an end, but they got nothing to be ashamed of. They overperformed so many times in the past month that even with this loss, they've still got to be excited about their future. For SMU, they cruise into the championship round once again, and they are ready to face the winner of Texas A&M and Georgia. So let's talk about that. We got number 7 Georgia going up against number 6 Texas A&M. On the day of, the head-to-head matchups, they favored Texas A&M in 8 rides, Georgia in 10, and 2 toss-ups. So Georgia was actually favored, even though they were technically the underdog. Here's what really happened. Fences and Flat were 5-0 sweep for Georgia. Horsemanship went 3-2 for Texas A&M, and Reining went 4-1 for Georgia. That made the final score 16-4 for Georgia. So Texas A&M gets upset here. They probably aren't thrilled with giving up all the jump seat points like that, but they ran into a red-hot Georgia team, and that just happens sometimes. So, yeah, for Georgia, they are cruising, so they go into the championship. And we're going to stick with the dual discipline one more time, just finish this out. Over we go to Saturday. This sets up a national championship showdown between number 1 SMU and number 7 Georgia. Now, until this point, every meet that did not involve SMU has been an upset. Would the Mustangs avoid being upset? Let's see. The pre-meet favorites in the head-to-head matchups came up, and SMU was favored in 10 rides. Georgia was favored in 7, and there were 3 toss-up points. So here's what happened. Fences went 3-2 for Georgia. Flat was a 5-0 sweep for Georgia. Horsemanship went 4-1 for SMU, and Reining went 3-2 for Georgia. That made the final score 12-8 in favor of Georgia, and they became the new and very unlikely national champions. I say unlikely, but really this was just an amazing run for Georgia. They got hot at the right time, and they just roared through this tournament. SMU did their best to hang with them, but Georgia just outrode everybody they faced all weekend. With the way Georgia's season started way back in the fall, there was just no way I would have believed you if you had told me that they would end up winning it all, but hats off to them for doing it. They showed that they could get those points when they had to. So now we're going to jump back in time, and we're going to look at the single discipline tournament that was also going on in Ocala. We're going to go back to Friday and look at the semifinal between number 1 Lynchburg and number 4 Dartmouth. Now, I predicted this was going to be a 7-3 Lynchburg victory. When the head-to-head matchups came out, Lynchburg was favored in 6 of the rides, Dartmouth was favored in 2, and there were 2 toss-up rides. Here's what really happened. Dartmouth won Fences 4-1, and Flat went 3-2 for Lynchburg. Now that made the final score 6-4 Dartmouth. So Lynchburg goes down in the first round. We've never seen that happen. That was a pretty big surprise. But Dartmouth just got hot at the right time, and the Greens slide on into the championship meet. Still got one more semifinal to talk about, though. Number 2 Sweetbriar versus number 3 Charleston. I thought this one was going to be close. I predicted it would be a 5-5 tiebreaker win for Sweetbriar. When the head-to-head favorites came out the day of, it also predicted a 5-5 split. So here's what happened once it got riding. Fences went 4-1 for Charleston, and Flat went 3-2 for Charleston. So that made the final score 7-3 in favor of College of Charleston. So just like Lynchburg, Sweetbriar gets bounced in the first round. We've never seen that. Lots of crazy upsets in this whole tournament this weekend. Must be something in the water. But at the end of it, we ended up with Dartmouth versus College of Charleston for the national championship. The head-to-head matchups that came out that morning favored Charleston in 6 of the rides, Dartmouth in 2, and there were 2 toss-ups. But here's what really happened. Dartmouth won Fences 4-1, and Charleston won Flat 4-1. That made the final score 5-5. That was a tie. So when they go and they add up all the raw points from the judges, Dartmouth won in the tiebreaker. So the Big Green, they rolled into Ocala, and they finished off just an upset crazy week with one last upset. Congratulations to them. I really thought College of Charleston had the best shot to be an upset champion, but Dartmouth rode just their best rides of the season and when it mattered the most. So hats off to them. So once again, your new national champions are Georgia over in the dual discipline and Dartmouth over in the single discipline. So this week, we're done. Ain't no more meets going to happen until we get around to next season in the fall, so there's no need to do any rankings. But I do want to point out how outstanding some of these tournament performances were this week. So what I've done is I've gone through and I've compared each of the participating teams' point totals in Ocala to what their starting lineups averaged during the season. And what this does is it paints a pretty clear picture of which teams showed up ready to compete and which teams did not. First, we're going to look at the single discipline side. The order here is probably pretty obvious if you were paying attention as to how the individual meets went. Dartmouth is first. They averaged 5.5 points in the tournament compared to their season average of 4.78 points, so they overperformed. Next is Charleston. They averaged 6 points in the tournament, which was better than their season average of 5.38. So they had a high average and they did even better than that. Third was Lynchburg. They averaged 4 points in Ocala compared to their season average of 6.32, so a big drop-off for them. But that drop-off was not as big as fourth place Sweetbriar, who averaged only 3 points in Ocala compared to their season average of 5.8 points. So if we look at these numbers and we can basically equate whether you were overprepared or underprepared based on whether you overperformed or underperformed. And Dartmouth and Charleston, they definitely were the most prepared in the single discipline tournament for the Ocala this weekend. So let's do the same for the dual discipline teams. Now, first place is probably obvious again, Georgia. The Bulldogs averaged just a hair over 14 points in Ocala, which was a lot better than their season points per meet average of 10.73. Now, next is the national runner-up, SMU. They averaged 13 2/3 points in Ocala compared to their 12 points per meet season average. So even though they were the top performing team all season, they did even better once they got into Ocala. Now they still lost to Georgia, but even with that factored in, they still did really well. But again, Georgia had better numbers than that. So that just shows you how impressive that run by Georgia was. Now next, in third is South Carolina. The Gamecocks performed just a tad below their season average. They averaged 9.75 points in Ocala compared to 10 points and third, which was their average for the season. But this is not bad considering that the competition level ratchets up when you get to the postseason like this. Now, right behind South Carolina is Oklahoma State. They dropped from their season average just a little bit as well. They had 10 points in Ocala compared to 10.8 that they typically do in the season. Now we're going to get to some teams that had big drop-offs in the tournament. Texas A&M averaged 7 points in the tournament, which was a significant drop from their season average of 11.19, and that placed the Aggies at 5th on this list of tournament performances. Right below them, in 6th place, is TCU. They only earned 5.5 points in the tournament compared to their season average of 11.4 points per meet. Next, we have Auburn. The Tigers earned 5.5 points in this tournament, just like TCU did, but since Auburn typically averages better in the season, which was just a tad below 12 points, they end up landing at 7th in terms of how well every team performed in Ocala. And then the last team, 8th in terms of tournament performance, is UT Martin. The Skyhawks only scored 2 points in Ocala, which was a far cry from their 10.13 season average. So, again, the order of performance, and I would also argue that this was also indicative of how well prepared the teams were going into this tournament. You've got Georgia, then SMU, then South Carolina, then Oklahoma State, then Texas A&M, then TCU, and then Auburn, and then UT Martin. So what do we make of all this? Well, for starters, getting prepared and ready to perform in the postseason is a lot more important than just having a bunch of previous wins. Auburn, TCU, Lynchburg, and Sweetbriar just lit up the scoreboard all season long, but in the end, they got outridden by less acclaimed rosters. And I'm going to say this for Auburn fans, there is a lot about these recent postseason performances that should have you very, very concerned. 2 years ago, when coaching positions opened up at Auburn and they were filled internally, I told you that the strategy for doing that was to ensure that everybody is on the same page, because basically there ain't no other pages in the book. Well, now Auburn is going to have to write some new pages because getting upset 4 out of 5 chances is not the story that Auburn fans want to read about, especially when other programs are getting more done with less. Now, I don't know what the answer is for Auburn, but I think they need to make some changes in how they approach the national championship tournament, because whatever they're doing is just not working. And speaking of the tournament, there's been some talk that next year the league may move the championship to school-hosted sites instead of Ocala or some neutral site, and that they might also limit the field to just 4 teams. But somehow I think the coaches might change their mind on that plan, seeing as how only one of the top 4 seeds this year advanced to the second round of the tournament. I mean, this year really showed that maybe restricting the field is not the right move. But we'll see. The NCEA is not always known for doing making the best decision, so we'll see what they end up doing. Well, that is the end of another college equestrian season. I would like to thank all of you for listening this episode and following along on social media. Let's get back together in about 5 or 6 months and do it all over again. I'm your host, Auburn Elvis. Thank you very much for listening, and war horses.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on the E2C Network. On your way out, I want to remind you to stop by e2cnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for all our content across our podcast, YouTube channel, and much more. To stay up to date with us, make sure you're following social media accounts such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While our content here may always be Auburn sports heavy, if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. War Eagle.